And today, what we're going to talk about a very important topic, probably the most important topic of your Christian journey. Today, we're going to talk about spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity. Say spiritual maturity. And what spiritual maturity is, let me ask you, what do you think? What comes to mind? You don't have to say it out loud. What comes to mind when you think about spiritual maturity? When you talk about maturity, you're talking about growth. Okay? Maturity is a tricky word. Mature means for something to come into perfection. And perfection is the way it was designed to be. Okay? So for instance, let's look at something natural. I'm 5'7". I'm not supposed to be 6'3" or 6'4". I'm supposed to be the height that I am now. So I've come to maturity, meaning that I have grown to the height that God ordained for me to grow to. If someone's 6'3", he's growing or she's grown to the height that God has ordained them to grow to. So when we talk about spiritual maturity, we're talking about growing or developing into the person that God has intended you to be. Developing into that. That's maturity. It's developing into Christ likeness. That's who you're supposed to be. So spiritual maturity, you can write that down. Develop. Wow, I messed that all up. Developing into Christ likeness. Growing. Keyword. You're going to grow into this. You're going to grow into the character that God has imparted to you. You're going to grow into the wisdom and the knowledge of God. You're going to grow. You're going to develop. It takes time for these things to grow to maturity. But there are some hindrances that I want to highlight, and there is a method that I want to highlight as to how to do this. Because I think that there's a misconception that spiritual maturity is something that's just going to come to you overnight. But if you aren't sowing the seeds necessary for the growth, you'll never see it. And dependent upon how you sow, will determine how you grow. The Bible says, he that soweth sparingly, meaning you sow a little here, a little there. It's not so much, just a little here, a little reading here, a little praying here, a little study here, a little fasting here, a little church here, a little community here. Then you're going to grow a little here, a little there, a little there. But if I sow, so it says you sow sparingly, you'll reap sparingly. Now this is a principle, a biblical principle for anything. It could be for spiritual maturity. It could be for sowing money. It could be for what you invest in, your business, whatever. If you don't invest as much, you won't get as. But he that soweth abundantly, abundant means beyond measure. So he that sows abundantly, he will reap a harvest. So if you want to grow in God, what do you got to do? You got to grow, you got to sow, Do you want to grow sparingly? And I think that's the rate that a lot of people grow at. I find myself growing at that rate of sparingly. But if you want to grow abundantly, if you want to see a big change in your life this year, in your walk with God, how do you got to grow? How do you got to sow? That's the principle that God is. If I want a garden, I want a lot of food, I sow a lot of seed. If I want a little bit of food, I sow a little bit of seed. If you want to grow, be spiritually mature, meaning you want to be developing into Christ likeness, into his character, then you got to sow abundantly. If you take your time in the sense of being sparingly, what benefit is that going to be? You already know the benefit. You already know the result. It's sparingly. I can end the message there because that's enough. But I want to keep going. Hebrews tells us, go to Hebrews real quick. Stay on Galatians 6. We'll go to Hebrews because God is shifting something. I want to go with him. Go to Hebrews chapter. Where's that? There it is. Go to chapter 12. Go to Hebrews 12. I'm going to write down what I... So sowing and reaping is the key to spiritual growth. Okay, sowing and reaping. If you sow sparingly, that equals reap sparingly. So apply that to your spiritual maturity. If you sow abundantly, you're going to reap what? A harvest. That's for anything. You want to start a business? If you want to sow into the church, if you want to sow into people, and I'm not talking about sowing as just finances, because I think there's a generation that every time we hear the word sowing, we don't even think garden, we think money. The money can be applied to this, but I'm sowing into you right now. If I want to see more of an increase in you, then hey, let's have church on Wednesday, too, or Sunday and Wednesday. You get what I'm saying? Sowing more, and then you showing up, and we going at this together because we want to see the increase. So I believe that some of you, I want you to be honest with yourself. Don't say that loud. How do you feel like you've been the last year as in your relationship with God and when it comes to your spiritual maturity, developing into Christ likeness? I'm not talking about gifts, you operating in gifts and things like that at the moment. I'm talking about character. Say character. Okay, I'm talking about patience, about love, meekness, kindness, temperance, self-control. Those things. How have you been developing? Think about the last year and be honest with yourself and answer this question. Am I growing sparingly or am I growing abundantly? And I think that the answer is tied to how much you've been sowing. So if you go back and you think about, because it's sometimes we're biased when we look at our character, but if we're being honest, then we can have a truthful and honest answer with ourselves. But if you really want the test, look at how you've been sowing. How have I sowed the last year? Has it been every now and then? Or has it been abundantly? If you find yourself here this year and moving forward, come here. Because that's where you're going to see this. This in Hebrews 12. I want to read this here. It says, verse 1, go with verse 1. It says, wherefore seeing we are